members and think that you need to speak with them, we will tell you exactly how to do that towards the end. All right, so now let's get into the topic. AI costs are a real conversation right now, and Sage is going to give you the framing you need to think about this strategically. Sage, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Yep, so this presentation, I titled it the token economy because tokens are essentially driving a major price point for businesses across the planet. And navigating this situation is incredibly important, as one company found out when allegedly they had a surprise $500 million token bill or AI spend. Um, at the same time, I'm going to be going into things like how the actual cost per unit of intelligence has been actually exponentially decreasing. And there's this kind of paradox situation we're in where folks are possibly spending far more on AI than they actually need to. And so I'm going to be going into a traditional kind of mind map of buy versus rent versus build, except we're applying it to the concept of AI. So if you can go to the next slide. So why does this matter right now? Um, so like I mentioned before, there's been a massive price drop for essentially top tier capability in this past quarter. Some folks are still experiencing massive spend increase, however. So I'm going to try to make this relevant to small business owners, startup founders, and enterprise leaders. So what tool are you using? Are developers who are working for you spending exponentially more than they should be? And how can you answer questions at the board like, why is AI budget doubled when prices have collapsed? Next. All right, so just to go into a little bit of technical detail. So what is a token? It's a chunk of text, typically smaller than a single word. Here, I've broken it up into like your business pays per token. 1,000 tokens is roughly 750 words. Um, Essentially, there's two ways that you're paying for this. One is the tokens that you're sending to a AI provider, and the other is what that AI model is outputting. There's a funny story. Someone recently greatly reduced their AI token spend by forcing the model to essentially speak like a caveman. So, um, when the model itself was outputting basically caveman speech, it was collapsing that response and collapsing the number of tokens being output and therefore reducing costs. So a funny thing about token spend, output costs more than input. So the length of your answer drives your bill. And an interesting aspect here as well, that software engineers are having to navigate is as we get as we use more and more complex AI tools to code, they are essentially um, having to do many, many more turns of things like thinking and reasoning. And so AI and software has been one of the best places to go look and see what the latest insights are on cost savings. And we'll go to the next one. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the cost of intelligence is in free fall. In 2021, GPT-3 was about $60 per million tokens. However, at this point in 2026, the same benchmark performance gets you about 6 cents per million tokens. So that's about 1,000 times cheaper. And I suspect that we're going to see this graph with kind of continue with open source models, essentially. So open source models are still in their infancy. They are something that you can self-host and run your own AI essentially. And at a certain point, I would say maybe by December, we're going to start seeing some, maybe Opus 4.6 level open source models And so this is something to keep in mind. It's a natural curve of technology that it just gets cheaper over time, most of the time. Next slide. But yes, so here's where the paradox is. And earlier when I mentioned that companies spending approximately 500 million, pricing is essentially in chaos right now. So what's happening is that the frontier LLM providers are having to subsidize the cost of AI for the entire industry using investor money. And sometimes there's hiccups in that process. That happened this past month. So what you're seeing is what was a $500 bill for a developer shop for AI in April became a $5,000 bill in June. And so this is something that I bring up to kind of alert folks to whenever you're navigating costs in AI, is that you have to keep careful watch over the metrics of your organization, the costs, carefully set budgets and things like that, because essentially the the costs can skyrocket without notice. For example, for a while I was using Opus 4.7, I believe, and it went from 6 premium request per usage to about 30. So that was a massive increase. Oh, and that was across just 1 month. And then we'll do next slide. So there's 3 ways to get tokens. Going back to my buy, rent, build model, I categorize buy as going directly to Frontier Labs. Rent is going to open models that are hosted for you, and build is when you run those models yourself. So buy it is the highest expense here. So some of the Opus models might go all the way up to about $25 per million output tokens. Whereas with renting, you're using Chinese open source models. There's GPT OSS, which is ChatGPT's open source model. So there's also a group called New Research or News Research who open sources their models and actually trains them by crowdsourcing the compute, which is very interesting source of open source models. And then when it comes to building, that's when maybe you rent a GPU per hour H100 chip. Or as I've done, I actually have a framework desktop that I've procured to host my own model here at home. And next slide. So zooming in on the buy category, essentially what I recommend folks see this as is it's frontier capability. You don't have to manage the infrastructure, and it's useful for the most complex tasks in your business. So a good example here would be when in software, when we're getting ready to work on a new project with a client, for instance, we might have some very intense discussions at the beginning of that engagement where we want to have the highest intelligence capability possible. So we're willing to pay $25 per million tokens. Once that task is digested down into very simple individual line items, that's when we start to do what I like to call routing and start to hand off simpler and simpler tasks to cheaper and cheaper models. So we start with the buy capability. This is also a good layer for folks who are not very technical and need to essentially learn AI and get used to the capability first before trying to worry about things like going to open source model providers or even the more technically complex option of going to set up their own AI model. So on the next slide, we'll zoom in on rent. So with renting, there's some great resources out there. Deep Infra is actually one I recommend. Deep Infra has a vast array of open source models that you can essentially get an API key to, and then it's pennies compared to using something like Opus. A great way to think about this is like you're are you're basically trying to you're trying to set up an option that's not completely controlled by a vendor. So it's one thing we're trying to avoid is vendor lock-in. Going back to the story with Anthropic and ChatGPT and OpenAI, um, they they have a massive kind of investor debt load, essentially. So at some point, they're going to have to find ways to recomp that expense. Um, what we're doing when we rent open models is we're protecting ourselves, we're providing a backup, and we're also essentially uh, setting up that tier structure. So maybe for some parts of your business, you might go to Anthropic and use the high intelligence model. But other parts of your business might actually do just fine with the 5 cents per million output tokens, with maybe a 20th of frontier pricing and quality. So it's it's a great option to support this like tiered structure of starting at the top and then maybe 20% Anthropic, 80% renting. And then also, speaking of deep infra, one thing I also like to check in on is whether or not the provider that I'm using is well funded, and Deep Infra was actually able to raise quite a bit of funds. So I've been recommending them lately. Next slide. So build is where it gets fun for an engineer like me. There's several options. One of the reasons I decided to get my own machine and start building with a small language model is by introducing that constraint to yourself and your business, you essentially are forcing your folks to start to learn how to manage economically viable AI. If you do that sooner than later, it's less of a massive pivot point for you individually if you're like a solo business owner or a founder. But when you scale that up to larger and larger organizations, it becomes a story about specific business processes, specific outcomes being that need time to essentially adjust downward to the appropriate model. Um, Part of the problem here is that going back to the massive subsidization situation, what we don't want in a business is to find out all of a sudden that we have a massive sticker shock situation. There's two kind of paths you can go with the build section. One of them is spending money to rent a chip out, which costs about $2.85 to about $3.50 per hour. And then you can scale it up to however many chips you need. And it might be about 5 to 10,000 per month. But with 50 plus daily users, it starts to make economic sense. It's also important to remember that when you host your own model, you're not being forced to migrate to new models frequently. So there's about like a 3 or 4 month to sometimes 6 month time frame where maybe the 4.5 Sonnet model that you got used to, that all your processes are built on, is now being deprecated, or basically you're no longer going to have access to it. And the problem is models change. So once that deprecation happens, now all of a sudden you have a massive, essentially stressor on your business where you could migrate to the new model, but maybe 50% of your business processes no longer work. Um, Having the ability to essentially own the model and host it yourself allows you to have that long-term controlled migration, essentially. Yep. Oh, one more back. There we go. So an interesting uh, news article that came out recently was about DeepSeek themselves, DeepSeek V4 Pro. So essentially, they decided that they were going to put it on a 75% discount indefinitely. So if we compare like Claude Opus 4.6 to uh, DeepSeek V4 Pro, just on the software engineering benchmark, you can see that for 25% of the cost, you can get a pretty similar capability. Um, I always recommend that folks use multiple benchmarks to make decisions, but more importantly, what you want is your own internal benchmark, whether you're an individual who is using AI to work with, to maybe expand the number of people you can work with, to interact with clients. You could have maybe an Excel sheet with what I call evals, where you just have a set of prompts that you use and what constitutes success for those prompts. And then you can go and apply that test to each model to see which model is actually working for you. Um, as your business grows, that eval becomes even more important, and it also becomes a little bit more complex. It mirrors this idea that you understand all of the it's healthy to understand all of the processes in your business, to be able to describe them, and then be able to take that description and turn it into AI, real AI outcomes. So once you understand those processes, you can develop what is called evals to then go and test each of these models against your specific business cases. Yep. Oh, there we go. So, like I said before, cheaper tokens can still mean bigger bills. Um, reasoning models, especially. So they might have, you're not just making one request to the model and getting one output. You might be making one request, and then that model is going through some sort of reasoning process to um, input and output uh, a dozen, like 3 to 10 times, and that can multiply the sticker price. So you wouldn't want to use something like a reasoning model if you had a very simple task and it already understands that task and it's executing on it, and might be potentially charging you more than it's reasoning about a task that needs no more reasoning, essentially. So yeah, so there's like 1,000 times spread for overlapping work. Essentially, that says, you know, you could spend $75 or you could spend 75 cents. And for some tasks, you might be spending the 75 when you should be spending the 70 or the $75 when you should be spending the 75 cents. So, oh, gonna go back. So essentially, this slide boils down to stop asking, what does this model cost? And start asking, what does this task need? And budget in cost per task completed. So if you're resolving a ticket, that has its own budget. If you have a document you're processing, that has its own budget. If you're creating, many draft emails, like maybe you have, a large number of essentially draft products that you're churning through to when you're designing something. So like design iterations on an app, for instance, being able to budget on those tasks will be a lot more reliable in terms of estimating your cost. And now next. So this is something I'm anticipating is going to be on everyone's radar, which is essentially routing by difficulty. This goes back to the concept of there's a certain subset of hard work that it should be done by frontier models, but the vast majority of work can probably be done on the cheap rented or built model that we were hosting ourselves. So understanding, and this goes back to understanding your business, the workflows, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and being able to intelligently translate between that layer and the which essentially models that you should be using for that layer. So if you put in the work to do this route by difficulty framework, you'll get an estimated 60 to 80% lower cost on mixed workloads. Because there's a real tendency for folks, and this goes much farther for organizations that have a lot of employees. Your employee might just be picking, oh, I'm just going to use the smartest thing for this for every one of my tasks all day, day in and out, because I'm individually measured by my performance, so I want the smartest model. Well, that doesn't necessarily work economically. So it's good to apply this kind of framework and think about how it might, what kind of budgets and controls you might want on your organization to prevent that kind of cost overrun. So yeah, predicting the future is tough, but I've tried to do a little research and think about where this is going by mid next year. As I showed earlier, there's an exponential drop off of intelligence or cost per unit of intelligence. So I imagine we're going to start seeing some of the frontier capabilities we have right now reduce in cost to the point that they're much more affordable than they are right now. I also think that open model inference is going to keep falling. It's been falling since 2023, and the open model community has been surprisingly robust at keeping up with frontier capability. It's so much so the case that the open source community forced OpenAI to produce open source versions of GPT, even though OpenAI didn't want to, which was surprising to me. And that's also something to keep in mind when thinking about how these frontier providers are financially leveraged. I'm not certain that everyone anticipated that the open source community would be able to essentially challenge the frontier model providers to this degree. I also think that there's going to be this floor effect where, it becomes cheap enough to self-host models, and you can match to do the routing pattern, so you can match to mid-tier paid ones, and be able to essentially replace a good chunk of things like Sonnet 4.6 with something like DeepSeek, which is a fraction of the price. Go to the next slide. So as always, it's good to think holistically about this stuff. So the price tag is only part of the risk. There's 4 strategic dangers that I also try to think about. There's vendor lock-in. We saw this with Claude Code especially. So folks that were using Claude Code were finding out that what they were expecting in terms of price didn't match what Anthropic had in their in store for them. So, and they also had some situations such as detecting when Claude Code was being used with things like Hermes or OpenClaw, and potentially charging a premium in those situations, simply because they rely on folks not using the tool to keep the unit cost, or to keep the subscription cost viable. In fact, the subscription is maybe like 20% of the actual price of the AI that folks are using. Some of the folks at Rosenblatt did some measurements on this as well, and noticed the Fable right now, for instance, is just incredibly expensive, and the subscription price didn't cover it. Oh yes, Fable is definitely a token consumer. So I caution against vendor lock-in as a strategy. There's tons of tools out there that you can use to prevent vendor lock-in, to give yourself your own like front-end interface and be able to choose who you want to be your API provider. There's model retirement, which I talked about, where they retire your model and suddenly half of your AI workflows need to be adjusted to work with the new family of models. There's data exposure. Everyone who's a basic consumer of AI is basically having all of their conversations absorbed up into training, which is concerning. And then shifting terms. There's been a lot of cases of AI company or some of the frontier companies like changing terms on companies, and it's causing some churn as well. Okay, let me go next. So vendor lock-in compounds quietly. It's one of those situations where you don't notice it until it becomes a huge, surprising pain point. As I showed earlier, when that dev shop had the $500 bill that transmuted over into 5,000. I like to use the 40% test. You know, if your primary AI vendor raised prices 40% tomorrow, could you move within a week? And that's a pretty good, you know, test case to leverage against a business or get people to start thinking about this stuff. Next slide. And then the model, drilling deeper into the model retirement. Again, they retire on their schedule. It's about 6 to 12 months for per model's life cycle. And when I say model, I'm specifically describing like 4.6 Sonnet, not the entire Sonnet family. So it's specific model versions. Um, yeah, and there's never been a model retirement that's been reversed. So it's a kind of a one-way street, and it's also a continuous maintenance burden on you or your organization. Or and I've done some building. I've built several apps with AI so far, and it's always a potentially catastrophic production event when an AI model retires. If someone is not paying attention and not doing this migration ahead of time. Um, so definitely something to keep in mind. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, just swapping the model is never 5 minutes. Uh, the prompts used before may produce different answers or tones or formats. In the case of doing something like uploading a document and getting data out of that document, that data may be misformatted with a different model, and you wouldn't know until you switch. Customer-facing output may change voice. So maybe your customer service bot goes from being professional to, you know, using very unprofessional language. At one point, a customer service bot also started sending Rickroll videos to the customers that were emailing in with complaints, and that wasn't a great experience for them. Uh, Everything needs to be retested. So having a very good AI evaluation suite is critical for managing AI in general. Uh, an evaluation suite, like I just described earlier, is a series of maybe prompts, and then you have various tests that examine the output of the prompt. So you send a prompt over, get output back, and you have an automated system to make sure that that output matches the vision of your business or you as an individual, so on and so forth. And then finally, staff retraining, documentation updates, downstream systems. So having to update everyone every 4 to 6 to however many months when a new model changes. Like if there's a way that your organization is using that model and all of your staff are very used to it, then all of a sudden that model changes and all of their workflows that they had internal to their mind essentially no longer work. They have to figure out how to do that process again with the new model. All right. So know where your tokens go and read the weather. So data exposure is a big issue. Interestingly, I think there's two ways to think of data exposure. There's the business opportunity of data, and then there's the risk of data. So a good example of opportunity is that when all of your folks are using AI, if you think about it, that is one of the best qualitative surveys of your organization that I can think of. Similarly, if you have PII, if you have sensitive proprietary company information, situations like that, that's where data exposure can kind of go awry. And then, of course, term drift is one everyone's familiar with. When we'll go next. So yeah, own the layers, not the vendor. So you want to own the front end of your AI app. You want the router. So being able to go change your models in a moment's notice, and then be able to have interchangeable suppliers. So a good example of this is like using Libre Chat with OpenRouter. So yeah, the next with a router, the next price collapse is a 1-day move. And next. Yeah, so all of the normal features that folks are used to with Anthropic and Claude, those are actually present in open source tools as well. So you don't necessarily have to feel like it's not like a 50% feature reduction by switching to open source. It's maybe like a 95% open source to Frontier overlap. Next. Yeah, so you have two paths ahead of you. If you have engineers or a freelancer, you can make them responsible for AI execution, but make sure you give them outcomes and goals, and especially establish key performance metrics. We need a way to know whether our AI is improving the business or not. And token maxing does not work. I do not recommend it. If you don't have engineering or freelancers available, you can use tools. There's a lot of off-the-shelf, download this tool, watch a YouTube video to set it up, and you'll be good to go. Next. And so I've created this Virent build matrix. I won't spend too much time on this slide as I have a PDF handout that I'll be dropping in the chat momentarily. So we can go next. And then I recommend this is a 1-year plan, but a lot of businesses might want to move faster than that. And it boils down to audit, know what's going on in your business, cut dependencies, don't build your castle in someone else's kingdom. Optimize. So how can we reduce cost, which is going to be important because the frontier providers are subsidizing AI significantly, and then revisit. So have a plan to come back and continuously improve your AI spend. Next. Yep, so not all tokens are the same. Route by difficulty and state provider agnostic. Next. All right. I'll drop that PDF in the chat and then hand it off.
Thank you, Sage. That was exactly the framing we needed. Thank you. And for anyone in the room who's thinking, I'm not there yet, you just got the map. And for those of you already dealing with the cost overruns or vendor lock-in, you now know who to call. And we're going to have Daniel give us a quick recap of everything we just learned before we transition.
Yeah, the one big takeaway from Sage's presentation that I was left with and wanted to give you an analogy that hopefully will stick is that these LLM providers are pretty much like drug dealers. They're giving us a taste of what they had to offer. And as soon as they get us hooked, that's when the prices will eventually increase. And so Sage is warning us about that future that's coming and how we can protect ourselves from that, whether you are right now are buying, renting, or building, even at the first stage where you are buying, the difference between you running Sonnet versus Opus and Claude is just an epiphany or takeaway that you can have. And then you can go back to those models and say, hey, based on the different models that you have, what is the best use for each different one? And then now you have a roadmap in terms of how you can leverage it.
Thank you, Daniel. Alrighty, so what we're gonna do now, just because we are running a little bit short on time, we're gonna save our Q&A to the end. So if you have questions that are pressing, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them after Jackson gives us a great intro about AI governance.
Yeah, and before we get started, I want to make sure who here actually is a solopreneur? And just type it in the chat. Just let me know yes or no. Yep, yep, look at that. Does anybody here have employees or contracting anybody? We got one no for that. Everybody else is a solopreneur, so perfect. I'm in the right spot, I think. Is anybody here using free tools? Well, make sure to type that in for me real quick, because that's an important question for this. Okay, so Phil's not using any free tools at all. Anybody else?
Can you give
No?
some examples,
Okay.
Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, if you just have ChatGPT, have you ever created an account with an AI tool and then even forgotten about it? That also counts as well as a free tool. And the reason why, yeah, see, Dev is in that lane. Yep. So let's actually dig into that real quick. So we're talking about AI governance. You guys probably have heard about it before, but you're not quite sure or you've looked into it yourself. I saw that I think it was Deb who was saying that they were building chatbots, right? So hopefully you've explored some AI governance as well. Um, but really, we need to talk a lot about AI governance as it gets more and more prevalent every single day. So for starters, I mean, having AI without any AI governance, it's like 500 self-driving cars with no traffic laws. I mean, no stop signs, no traffic lights, no speed limits. It's pretty chaotic. And there's a reason for that because every single tool that you have, if you're paying for it and you leave data training on, well, when you put in proprietary information from your company, it has already been ruled by the Supreme Court that if it comes back out of AI, you no longer own that. I just want you to think about that. If you put your logo into AI and it spits it out somewhere else, that's somebody else's officially. So I'll let that soak in because we're not even done yet. Because let's talk a little bit about your business, right? If you've got those free tools connecting, you forgot about them and you connected to them, those are integrated to your email. Those are going to be integrated to your data. That means it has access to everything. If you didn't turn that off and you're letting it train, it's still polling to this day. So have you checked through on all of your old tools that you even just wanted to test out for a minute? Because that could be a huge concern. It's the same thing as when you put in your data and you're leading David training on about your business. Well, that goes out somewhere. And again, you no longer own that. Now, if we look at your customers, if you're anywhere near HIPAA compliant, you're working with financial companies, right? The second you put any of that data and it spits it out, again, they no longer own it. And the minimum fine for that comes around $200,000. And everybody cares about their wallet. So let's talk about that a little bit because how many of us are actually working with people in other states? And yes, I'm looking for a chat reply real quick. Is anybody else here working remote, working with other states? So we've got, oh, did anybody else see that lightning? That was cool. So see, Patty, everybody here is working with people in different states. Do you know the AI governance laws in their states? Because that's what applies to you. It's not the same as when I sign a contract with an employee and I get to say, hey, where do I want us to have our laws for our contract written and applicable based off of that contract with another business. Instead, AI, it's where it's implemented. It's the same thing here in Iowa, and I think California are the only two that require AI to announce that it's a chatbot. It has to announce it's an AI within the first 5 seconds. If you've noticed, ChatGPT started doing that about a year ago. So has Claude. They all announced that they're a chatbot. That's because they're trying to apply to the laws everywhere. So you got to keep in mind about that as well. Now, the great thing is, as we already talked about, I'm going to leave you guys with some actionable steps that you guys can take advantage of. So one of those things is a website that updates monthly with all the newest AI governance laws. So you can watch these other states that you're working with and see and make sure that you're compliant with theirs and yours as well. Now, we're going to keep talking about this as we get into it. So, in case you guys aren't aware of what AI governance is or haven't dug into it, it's the simple framework that you build for your business, including all the policies, processes, and controls. What AI tools should I use? And you got to remember that even as a solopreneur, that's applicable to you because you can use that policy to make sure, okay, with this customer, I can use this AI tool. With this customer, I cannot because they are in different states. And the reason why I bring this up is because ISO 42001. Now, if you've never heard of that before, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you've ever worked with a financial company or anything similar, you've heard of these security laws that they have in place typically. And they're usually either a SOC or an ISO law. So this is ISO 42001, and it was created in December 2023. Now, there's been about 5 other different gold standards that have come out after it, but they all go hand in hand with ISO 42001, which is why this is still considered the best gold standard you can have for your business. And there's a good reason why. It's dynamic. It holds somebody accountable. You have to put in there who is accountable. And my greatest example of that is if you're a construction worker and I put a hammer through a wall, you don't get mad at the hammer. You get mad at the person who put it through the wall. It's the same thing with AI. AI is a tool. It's a hammer. But you are the person with the access to it. You're the person who can block files. You're the person who can make sure that you're paying for the right tools and deleting the ones that you aren't using anymore so that it's not leaking your data. And that's what ISO 42001 is. Now, another great part about it is it also takes a look at how does it interact with my customers? How does it interact with my business? Then how does it interact with, since everybody in here is a solopreneur, and not how does it interact with my employees, but how does it interact with you? So that is why this is such a great gold standard. Now, I have 2 more free things because I'm cool like that. With one being a simple breakdown of ISO 42001. The reason why, it's boring. I didn't want to read it, but I had to because that's what I like to do. And it's 61 pages long. So I have a 1 page breakdown for it so that you guys don't have to read the stupid boring crap that we have to. Then I also have a policy workbook so that way you guys can set up exactly the policies for your business. And the reason why we also brought this here today is because you can fill it out. It's 100% a PDF for you to fill out, and all you need to do is type into it. But as Sage is talking about with certain tools always being or running without your permission and leaking all of that great, well, those tokens, right? Those are valuable tokens. In fact, Perplexity leaked on me just the other day. Now, what you can do is then you have to map out what tools are being used for. So that way you don't have 10 tools sitting around. You can implement specifically those tools that are going to be utilized for your business. So that will save you money, that will save you time, and it will give you the peace of mind of security. Now, it is a simple playbook or a simple workbook, so you keep in mind that it will need to be filled out over and over again, or you can contact one of us to help you better run your business, specifically on the AI governance side or anything else you would like. Now, again, this is just another look at what ISO 42001 is. Again, so where AI will have access to, who is going to have the accountability for it. Again, you're all solopreneurs, so that person is going to be you. Now, you also have to set rules, and then you also have to identify and mitigate the risks that you may have. So again, I really focus on like free AI tools. That's honestly the biggest thing right now, but also the access that it can have is another major pressure point. So What can you guys do today already? So you guys can watch for Shadow AI, those free AI tools that you're using, or if you guys subcontract in the future or hire employees, if somebody is using a free AI tool that is not on this policy that you make and fill out, that's considered shadow AI. And you have to watch that because how do you know your employee is following all the right rules and the right policies if they're using a tool you didn't even want them to use? I'll let that sink in for a second. Now, number two is to turn off data sharing. This is super simple. The issue with it is all these AI companies try to hide it because, of course, they want to improve their models. So, for my perfect example, is typically you go into the settings and then you go into data privacy, and then it usually says, "Can we improve our models?" or "Can we train our models?" They never call it data sharing. So, look for that, turn it off. If you've got it on, give us a call. You may be in trouble. Now, you also want to evaluate the AI usage. So this is what we've been talking about with Sage all day. This is what I've been talking about. What are these tools doing? Where are they going? And what are they being used for? You can evaluate that using the policy workbook, which is number 4. So I'm making that one super easy for you guys today to fill out. And again, we'll send an email and I'll have all of that in there for you guys. So enjoy all the free stuff. And with that, thank you all. And we'll hit the questions that were brought up right at the beginning.
Thank you, Jackson. I think that's a great transition. We had a few questions. Daniel, do you actually, I think you have some responses to some of our earlier questions. And if there is anything else that you'd like answered again, please drop it in the chat so that we can make sure that we get to it or follow up with it later on.
In terms of questions, we had one from David. There's too many AI options that he is looking at and needs to learn. And then Phil talked about, as a solopreneur and fractional sales leader, how much should he be spending on AI each month and what model should he be using? Jackson, I think you had some thoughts on that. I'll let you go first and then I'll chime in wherever.
Yeah. So for the AI model that or the AI tools that you should be using, so that's actually what I specialize in, is I specifically specialize in being tool focused because you guys aren't implementing your own custom models. You guys aren't accessing open source models. You guys are using the tools that are available to you. They're easy to implement, right? So, David, do you mind having a little chat with me? Let's talk about what tools have you currently been using?
Well, look, I've been using um, Copilot, so whatever Copilot has been integrating with, whether it's been Claude or ChatGPT on one side, and I've been using Manus for research. But then you got people telling me, "Oh, you got to use Claude. You got to learn Claude. You got to do this with Claude." And I'm like, "Oh, whoa, I don't have time to learn
Yeah.
and build my own and do my own and whatever." And that's where I put the bro. And now I'm afraid to sound like my parents looking at the VCR flashing 12. I don't want to get to that point in my lifetime. So how do we manage to like all of this all like there's something new all the time.
Yeah, and here's the thing, man. Honestly, a lot of people are, "Oh, Claude." None of them knew there was Codex. I saw that big LinkedIn posting, "Oh, screw ChatGPT, you can't create anything." Well, they weren't even accessing the app. They didn't even know it existed, right? So a
Right.
lot of these tools, it's in there. Same thing, Copilot. If you're paying for that premium AI, you have access to Claude and ChatGPT. And then those custom GPTs that you've probably heard of and would like to use, right? Those are actually those agents, by the way. When you click agent, it's the same thing. Yeah. So really what I usually tell people is because look, it's my job to go and learn 50,000 tools. You don't need to do that. What I would do is really get good at the tools that you are already using, that you genuinely, and only add another one. Like Manus is a great one. If Waz was here, he would second that in a heartbeat too. It's absolutely fantastic, fantastic. And the great part about it is it accesses Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. That's the way it works. It's a multimodal agent. I would just become an expert in those. You can accomplish anything you're trying to do, honestly, between already the tools that you have. Like with the goals that you have, because again, you're not branding yourself as a AI expert,
No,
right?
but I mean, listen, if you come to my SCN group people and you're going to hear them talking about co-work and all what they're building and all these things, and I'm like, I don't have time. And then by the time you figure it out, who's updating it? Who's maintaining it? Who's tweaking it? How do I integrate it with everything else I have? I'm not an AI expert. I'm not spending that time. I have another practice. This is where the question is like, so what do we do in situations like, should we go online, look for these tools, hopefully bring them in, integrate them, call Jackson? Like, what the hell are we supposed to do, man?
Well, I'm sure you would say call Jackson because what is it you do, sir? It looks SEO, but
Sir,
am
first
I
of all,
wrong?
don't do that. I'm not an old guy. No, listen, I'm a sales consultant. Not
Right, right. So if
not like
somebody said
yeah,
they were struggling with sales and they couldn't figure out how to get the proper sales, what would you tell them to do?
I got you. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
We're calling Jackson. Don't worry.
But something you could do right now, honestly, is just stick with thank you, Phil. I'll reach out to you too. We can talk one-on-one. Um, I honestly what you need to do is seriously just learn your tools better, is what I'm hearing. Because I get it. All these people are trying to tell you it's shiny object syndrome. They're
That's it.
telling you about
Yeah.
10,000 tools, so of course it's exciting,
Yeah.
right? But invest in the tools you have, especially you're striking me as you're a Microsoft, like a
Yeah.
Microsoft
Yeah.
guy. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got Copilot, and Copilot is actually fantastic. If you learn how to use it, you can do everything you want to in there, right? And you've got Manus, so there's your creator because it uses Claude, right? So
Perfect.
And we are at the 12:59 mark.
Sorry, guys. I need to run myself like Phil. So thank you all very much. This was
Yeah.
awesome, and I look forward to the next one. All right. And got to spread the love to the rest of the group.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Cheers.
Awesome. So we are at 1 p.m. We'll follow up with an email. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you found it informational. And if you have questions, we'd love to speak with you to answer those questions for you.
Yeah, and keep an eye out for the next invite on LinkedIn. So we do these every month, and we look forward to seeing you there. Bye. Thanks, guys.
See y'all later.